Hey guys, so this is Sim. Sim's joining us from all the way from US. It's pretty late there, so thanks, Big Sim, for taking out the time. Really appreciate it. Um, we'll just give a few minutes so that others can join in. We've just crossed the one o'clock threshold, so I'll just set a few things up. And Sim, I'm gonna
Definitely.
make you co-host as well, so you have access to pretty much
Got it.
everything there.
Right. I'll still let you run the show. I don't know who to one person is waiting. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll admit anybody who joins in. I'm just changing the settings here so folks can join in easily. Um, I could. Guys, so generally the way it will work is I have few things kind of set up that we'll just generally have an open chat with Sim as well. During this time, anytime you have any specific questions on either any topic, anything different, etc., feel free to just put those in the chat. And whenever we kind of pause from our intermittent discussions, we'll pick up questions and then we'll have a general sort of a Q&A at the end as well. So. Uh, Sounds good, Sim. Anything else?
Sounds good. Yeah. Sounds great.
All right,
Hey,
perfect.
everyone. Thank you for joining me. It's a great honor today to be doing this talk with Mayank. I've known Mayank for many years, and this is actually a great opportunity. I am really excited to share. Hopefully, I have some things to share, so it worth your time, right? It doesn't bore
Yeah.
you.
No,
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
it'll.
If you have any question, please, you know, uh, type in the chat, and I can see the chat feed right now. Yeah.
All right, cool. So, fun fact a little bit about me and Sim. We kind of go back to the same master's university. We were both at EA briefly, and we both attended entrepreneurship classes together in our master's program. And now we're both at the stage in our careers where we both started our own companies. So, kind of life has had taken a full circle between us. But yeah, all right, cool. So that's kind of a little bit of a thing. So we have enough students. Let's get started. So Sim, we'll kick off with some background information itself. So why don't you just sort of give us a peek of how things have been with you and how things have shaped up and where's your career sort of heading in now.
Sure, definitely. So, where do I start, right? I grew up in China, right? Then I came to US for grad school. I've been always, interested in, technology. I see myself as a techie, right? And went to one of the best engineering school in the US, and after graduation, kind of stayed in the U.S. and worked in the Silicon Valley. Up to now, probably 6 or 7 years of working in the Silicon Valley, as an employee and also starting my own company, right? So it's been a really kind of interesting journey. My in the past few years, my work experience is mostly related to gaming and streaming. So my first job, I'm working as a front end game developer, a Unity developer in a mobile gaming company in San Francisco, and we were working on a mobile title, and for probably a little bit around 2 years, and eventually published the game in China and in Korea, made it to the top tier, the top one grossing chart on both iOS and Android stores. Then I was working for Tencent. Not sure if you guys heard of it. Many of you may have heard of it. It's a huge company originated in China. I was working for their gaming department, also as a game developer for about a year. Then after that, I joined a startup to work on esports and live streaming, to take the company from only there's practically no traffic to the website to over like 3 million unique users every month, growing up with a startup. Then I figured, hey, I'm at a stage where I should do my own startup. So, a little bit over a year ago, I started Onyx Labs. I'm currently the co-founder and CTO of Onyx Labs, and we are building a product for live streamers on Twitch to generate revenue through sponsorships. So, in summary, basically, I'm lucky enough, or maybe unlucky enough, to work for companies at various sizes. From my own startup, only 2 to 3 people, to like mid-sized companies, 50 people, to huge public companies, 50,000 employees, and not worth the market cap of 500 or 400 and 500 billion dollars of market cap company. Just experiencing how vastly different it is to work at companies of different sizes, different stages, and hopefully I can share some of that in today's talk.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, and like you highlighted, so having you as a guest was super sort of interesting because you've been a game developer, you've worked with some really big names in the industry, and now you've transitioned into being a web developer almost, right? Where you're actually building using these latest technologies that full stack developers are learning today, right? On React and Node.js and Angular and whatnot, right? And pretty
Right.
much everything else under the sun. So you have both sort of experience, and since we had batches of both students, it was really sort of interesting to have this chat with you. So briefly, you mentioned like you were working with Tencent, which has probably what like lakhs of employees across, like lakhs means like 100K, right? The Indian terminology of numbers. So multiple locations that spread across, and now you're right, under 10 employees, and also in your previous companies that you've worked at, you've been at companies where there are 50 employees or 100 employees, right? So you have this huge spectrum of different companies. So personally, when you were there as a developer, right, or senior developer, right, what was your sort of differences that you felt working at something like Tencent, where there are hundreds of thousands of employees and big, huge ass teams, right? Whereas companies with 50 to 100 people, and now startups were under 10 people, right? Like, how do you sort of compare and contrast those three in terms of, from a developer's perspective, your experiences there?
Right, definitely. That's a great question. It's actually one of the things that I wish I had put in more thought, especially when I find my first job, right? Because I just wasn't aware of that. The difference is so huge. Working at big companies versus small companies. I just looking back in the days, I'm just thinking, oh, okay, I need to find a job, right? I heard a few names, put in resumes. It is only when you look back at those days, at those different experiences, and then you realize, wow, it is something that really worth think through, and especially manage your expectation, right? Like what it's like. So working for Tencent, for instance, like Tencent has 50,000 employees, right? It has a great cafeteria. It's running multiple campus globally. There's no way you can know all of those people, right? So you are the people you work really closely are still your department, still your team, right? You work, practically you generally on a day-to-day basis, you work with maybe 20 to 30 people, right? Then you are basically working on a product of this company, right? Like for me in particular, I'm working on a game of many of the games that Tencent is building, right? And I'm only handling the engineering aspect. of this one game, right? Versus at a much smaller company, for instance, when I'm working at Sliver TV, right? That's the job I took before I started my company. There's about around about a dozen employees, right? The company has just closed its A round, it worth about $100 million. You are basically working on the only product of the company. The product, the company has only one product, and you are handling a very critical part of it. So the difference there is basically if you work at in my experience, if you work at a really really huge company, you need to realize that you are only your role is defined, right? Like your role is if you're a front-end engineer at Tencent, you're not even allowed to, for instance, look at the backend code because there's security concerns. There are a lot of other people that's more qualified than you to work on those things. So it's a better use of your time to work on your predefined job, right, as a front-end engineer to work on the game features. Versus when you're working at smaller startups, I think there's a famous quote from Michael Seibel. He's the co-founder of Twitch. He basically says, and I totally agree, which is when you're working for startups, you get jobs that's far beyond, like you're not qualified for, basically. You're wearing a lot of hats on a day-to-day basis. You have to work on the front end, work on the back end, be on call all the time. And, there's the admin tool side of it, the cron job, right? Like even you need to, handle some customer support issues, right? Like all those issues comes to you. So you're wearing multiple hats at a smaller company. But at a much bigger company, you are kind of focused on one vertical of your area, of your technique, and you specialized in one vertical. So that basically results in, for instance, the technology you're using on a daily basis at a big company. There's a lot of foundation that is there built for you before you were there by many other people, right? Like if you're making a game, the game has a built pipeline that's already set up, right? There's a lot of reusable code base, and your first responsibility is probably not to create new things, but to actually get familiar with the existing, many code bases or libraries that the company has built before you, just to how to use it, right? So your skill set is somewhat binded to the company's kind of pre-existing code set, and you are expected to build on top of it for to gain speed, right? Of course, and for to make it stable. But versus if you're working for a smaller company, you don't have those stepping stones. You kind of have to figure out those yourself, open source libraries, and to use startup tech, right, versus big company tech. Beyond those things, right, there's of course apparent differences when when you're working at bigger companies. You have nicer cafeterias, retirement plans, a lot of benefits. You probably don't have as good as many of those things if you're working at a smaller company.
So I think you mentioned a lot of good points there. So
right.
kind of the way I see the same picture is like, when you're starting at any company, big or small, right? It's like a mountain that's in front of you, right? When you're starting at a bigger company, say Google, Facebook, or any of these, conglomerates, huge ass companies, thousands of employees, right? It's like you have to climb about it, right?
Right.
In an existing company or a big company, you have a nice elevator, right? Just stand on the elevator and it takes you to the top, right?
Right.
But when you're working at a startup, it's like there is no path, right? It's just a rugged mountain, and you have to figure out whether to go right, whether to go left, how to put your next steps, which is kind of, a little bit sort of exploratory, because you can figure out there are 10 different paths to take, right? But when you're in a bigger company, you just step into the elevator and now the doors close. So now your view is limited to just whatever is inside that elevator, right? You
Right,
cannot
exactly.
see the entire mountain. You cannot explore a lot of the shit that's going around you. And now you're sure you'll still reach the top. And eventually, even in the startup, you'll still reach the top. But there's a lot more sort of learning, a lot more exploration, and kind of things involved there, right?
Right.
So that kind of is leads me into sort of this question: if I put myself back 10 years when I just started my career, right, it was my first job. In that case, as a person, how do you think I should think about, is like a bigger company a good thing for me? Is a startup a good thing for me? As an individual, going back 10 years from now, how would I evaluate, given all the information that there is about these companies, about startups? There's risk involved, there's learning involved. How do you think a young developer should think about it?
Right. I think a young developer should really think long and hard about it. Because you're basically making a probably arguably the most important decision in life, career wise, right? Like different paths how you choose, right? And there are a couple of things I would like to basically think. So basically, um, there's the I like to think about it as a risk tolerance versus reward expectation sort of spectrum, right? So um, if you draw a line, right? If you draw a line, and on the left side is extremely high risk, right? Like but the reward can be extremely high, right? In the middle is kind of you know the medium risk and medium reward, right? On the far right is kind of low risk and low reward, right? If you draw a line like this, then you can kind of try to plug companies that along those lines, right? Then you can try to, what kind of risk I am accepting, given the stage of my life, and what kind of reward financially and both career-wise and both learning new technology, or like self-fulfillment kind of impact-wise, what kind of reward I'm looking for, right? So the if you're talking about impact, right, you can make significant impact in both small companies and in big companies, right? You can, if you are, building, Google Map at Google, or like if you're building Gmail in, also Google, right? You are impacting, millions of people's life, right? Versus if you're building something completely new, right? The world has never seen it at your own startup. You can also change the world in a very fundamental way. So you can impact the world in both small companies and in big companies, just through just different ways, right? If you're thinking about, hey, I'm joining the next unicorn, I'm joining the next Uber, or joining the next Facebook, and as a early employee, right? I worked there for 4 years, for instance, and the stock option, everything included, 10 basis point, and then later the company worth Facebook like $500 billion, and that's $500 million for you, right? So if you look at that, then you think, okay, it seems like if I'm joining at a unicorn company, then it later turned on to a huge, multi-billion company. The financial reward is huge, but you also need to think about the risk of any startup can basically go out of business anytime, right? Like I have worked at even mid-sized companies, like venture-backed companies. Those companies haven't really figured out how to make cash flow to become cash flow positive. They're venture backed. They're under tremendous pressure of grow the company. There's there can be up and downs in the economy. There can be layoffs happening all the time. So you just need to understand that different companies it's not like saying, okay, I work for small companies, I won't have a bright future, or like I work for Google, I'm all set for life, right? Like Google or like Facebook can have layoffs too, right? So it's just there's really, I think the net is there's no right answer or wrong answer. It's mostly having to understand that there is a big difference. When you are putting in resumes, you look at like, in addition to the job description, which is apparently very important, you would look at also in addition to what the company does and what kind of vertical that the company is in. You are looking at things like, is this company, venture backed, how much does this company worth, right? Like when you are putting in resume to a company, how much does this company worth? You want to know that, right? Is it a $10 million company? Is it a $100 million company? Is it a unicorn of $1 billion companies, right? Easy information you can find online, but just surprisingly, I didn't know that and factor all of those things into my job hunting experience as a kind of young professional trying to find my first job, right?
I think that was something very important. I personally like what you just said, right? There's so much free information available, especially when you're joining a bigger company like Facebook and Google. You probably don't need to do a lot of background checks. But when you're joining a startup, there is always a sort of a job security risk, right? That you have to consider, considering your financials, and it maybe you have student loans, or maybe you have family to support, could be anything
Exactly.
depending on each individual, right?
Right.
So you kind of need to before you commit to a startup and say, hey, I'm going to join you guys, ask these hard questions, right? Like, hey, founders, you guys are telling me that this is a great opportunity. Can you tell me, are you guys bootstrapped, or have you raised external funding? And till when will this funding support us, right, as a company? Because a lot of students shy away. I think I've seen a lot of students kind of shy away from asking these hard questions. And one thing to kind of understand here is that the interview process is not just about company interviewing you. It's about you also getting to know the company, right?
Exactly.
Whether this is the right company for you or not, right? And that's where you need to kind of ask these very hard questions. And if the founders are not willing to disclose this information to you, maybe they're not going to be very transparent in the way they do things as well, right? And that might be an issue going forward when you work with them. So it's obvious to ask these questions up front and kind of get those answers early as well, right?
Yeah, that
So
is that is absolutely true. One of the advantages of working for a smaller company is that you have the opportunity to establish a more personal relationship with the founders and with the management, right? So you should take advantage of those opportunities. Talk to the founders, talk to the management, right? Um, like what Mayank said, if the company, if you feel it's a mismatch, right, between you and the company, or some early signs, well, one of the interesting things I have learned over the years, interviewing at companies and for companies, is that oftentimes if you see red flags during interview, um, a lot of the red flags of the company itself can reveal just, during the interview process, is the company really slow to respond to you, right? Like, is there a lot of, miscommunication? That might be a sign of the internal chaos of the company. That's just, you can see a lot, you can pick up a lot of the signs, just the way how the company is communicating to you, and, is it a more transparent company, or the founders are, it's high security, like how Apple handles things. You can pick up a lot of signs, and definitely ask the hard questions. Like, don't shy away from, it's interesting how when companies offer, for instance, stock options, right? Like, employees will hear, oh, I'm getting, 10,000 shares of the company. I'm getting, 20,000 shares of the company. Very rarely the employee actually asks, how much does my 200,000 shares of stock, like, what's the percentage of the company, right? Is it 1% or is it 0.001%? It's a percentage that matters, right? Not the number of shares. It doesn't matter. If you are in a position to ask those questions, it shows that you understand what you're doing, and you actually a savvy in the business, right? Like, don't shy away from asking those hard questions. What it is like a day, working here. Like, what's a day on a day-to-day basis, what it's like to work here, right? Where do you think the company will be in 5 years, right? Like, this is your chance to kind of understand the company's vision and see if that will align with your own
Yeah.
vision too, right?
Yeah, I think that's really sort of important, and especially when you're joining a startup. But again, risks are not just in startups. You can look back on WeWork recently, a huge company, $50 billion valuation, and had to lay off so much of their staff as well, right? So it's not about a big company or a small company. There's risk everywhere, and you need to get smart about which risks you want to take and which risks you want to avoid. Okay,
Right,
so
right.
another sort of perspective there is that if you're working, say, at Instagram or Snapchat or some of these huge companies, they always have small teams of engineers building small experimental products, right? They might be trying out something new, etc. And if things don't work out, they're very happy to let the entire team go and say, hey, this product didn't work out. We want to cut our losses. So, all these 25 engineers that are working on this one product, everybody off, right? Like the entire team gets laid off, right?
Right,
So it's not just about a big versus a small company. There is risk everywhere, and you just need to
right,
be smart about understanding what kind of risk you want to take, right?
right. It's
Cool.
crazy to think about, 10 years ago, Yahoo and IBM is the coolest job in town. And now,
Right.
like, no one even, like, they are
Yeah.
irrelevant, right? Like, who even cares about who takes pride in working at Yahoo anymore, right?
Yeah,
It's
and
just
with the
crazy to think
massive
about it.
layoffs Yahoo had to do as well over the years, right? Like, who would have thought that huge company that literally redefined the internet back in the 90s, right, would have that kind of a major impact that they're letting go of thousands of employees, and not just, a few handfuls. So, yeah. Cool. So let's switch gear a little bit now towards more of tech-related questions. I'm
Sure,
sure our
definitely.
tech-savvy audience is interested in those as well. So tell us about the technologies that you're working with, and especially when now you're looking to hire sort of young engineers working on products for your company specifically, right? These probably would be like people who have just graduated or maybe have 6 months of some internship experience, so very young in their careers.
Mhm.
What are the kind of things that you're looking at when you're evaluating these young engineers, and are you looking specifically at tech things, non-tech things? What's the right mix, and how do you evaluate these young engineers for hiring in startups?
Right, right, definitely. So I think my answer, since I'm working on my own startup right now, right? A lot of my answer will be more focused on startup hiring process, less about how big companies do things. When big company hire a new candidate, they tend to have more, training. They tend to have more onboarding kind of time grace period for the candidate to be productive. Probably, train the candidate for 2-3 months before their code is really merged into the master branch, right? Like versus as in startup, it's simply, for practical reasons, most of the time, startups can't afford to have, that long of a, training process. Kind of expect people to be really like smart and fast learner, right? Like, of course, easy to work with, easy to communicate. Those are the obvious things, right? But in particular, I think especially for me and the companies I'm hiring engineers for before, I think the things we're as a as an engineering kind of manager is looking for, especially in the new graduates, is that kind of like do you know some of the obvious like fundamentals of fundamentals, right, of computer science? That's just easier say than done, right? Like, I would ask questions like, for instance, hey, I have a browser, right? I typed in www.facebook.com. I pressed enter, right? Then a page shows up. Can you explain to me, like, what are the steps that's happening in between, right? Like, you are using it every day, right? Like, I'm looking at my Instagram right now, right? Like, I have a video feed, for instance. I took video from my phone, and now I am planning to let the world see it, right? Millions of people, I want to share this video out. How does it even work, right? Like, where is the video? How is the video getting streamed to the phone and getting, translated and rendered? And why my facebook.com domain gets translated into a web page? What are the 10 steps that's happening in between? Can you walk me through that, right? That's kind of like
So more practical
more.
shit, I guess, right?
What's that?
So more kind of practical shit, right?
Yeah, more practical, I think the answer I'm basically looking for is like, does this candidate really have maybe done it himself, right? Like, have you maybe, if you've ever set up a website yourself, right? You've ran a front-end web server, maybe a backend server too. You've set up the HTTPS yourself, right? Like, what's the CNAME, what's a how the domain subnames work. If you know all of that, you can queue these questions easily, right? You can answer this question very, very easily. I remembered in my Unity days, right, when I'm making games, one of the questions I like to ask is like, from a 3D model, right, from a 3D model, the animators made, till it's rendered on the screen, what is the engine doing, like, behind the scenes, right? Just the simple steps, right? Like, how the 3D object gets translated into a 2D and gets rendered. Just those, fundamental things, right? Like, does the candidate been through training, or to like put in the effort to actually understand how the basic things works, right? I think that's something really important. Other than that, for startups in particular, I see this at many places. The founders or the hiring manager look for a passion, a very strong passion, a passion that will really stand out, right? Like, the passion can be measured in practical ways, not just saying, I'm really excited to join your company. It's beyond that, right? Like, I remembered the last job I took, I was there's one other candidate trying to fight the same job position as I am, but he has more kind of experience, and he has worked longer in the industry. I eventually got hired because I took a week to make a demo basically for the company, right? So basically, specifically, I made a demo. It's a VR kind of headset, game demo. I took a dedicated week to make this demo in the hope that I can impress the startup. And eventually it did, and I got the job. So basically what I'm trying to say is, if you have a good demo reel, right? If you have a GitHub kind of, repository, right? If you can have the time and passion to actually build something for the company, right? Like, or it can be something simple. It can be like, hey, if you come to interview at my company and I ask, hey, have you used our product? You would want to say yes, right? You would want to say, yes, I have looked into your product. Yes, I have tried it. Yes, here's what I think about it, right? Like make a open discussion. What you don't want to say is, no, not really. I'm not exactly sure what your guys doing. I haven't even visited the website. I think you guys are doing blah, but in reality, we're really not. Those are like red flags, right? Just, you know,
Yeah,
definitely.
I think that's so the game development batch students would relate to this because I literally had the same detailed chat with them this week. They're towards the finishing their current batch, right?
Right.
So there's so many candidates that I outright reject just based on the fact that they say I ask them, okay, so are you familiar with what Outscale does? And they're like, you are a marketing agency. I'm like, what? Okay, so just make sure whenever you're going into a company, they have your resume. They look at it before they decide whether they want to interview with you or not, right? So before you spend 30 minutes, 45 minutes, 1 hour of your time with an interviewer person from that company, make sure you know what shit they're doing, right? Like it's so obvious and it's so fundamental, still people get that wrong for some reason.
Yeah. It's surprising that, over the past few years, many people actually coming into the interview without a clue where they are.
Hmm.
It's just shocking that, yeah, you should definitely, understand, because, it's a fundamental, mutual respect, right? The interviewer is spending time with you, and you are making a huge decision in your life, and, try
Yeah.
to, make best use of the time.
Cool. So Vishal sent this question on chat where he wants to know specifically, like if you want to start a startup, like there's so many kind of questions, and especially a lot of people in technology world nowadays are thinking about should I take a job, should I start my own startup, should I join a startup or a company, right? Like those
Right.
segment we've already discussed. But now if we focus on whether I want to start my own startup, right? Then how would I sort of evaluate, do I should I wait when I get funding then only start it? Should I wait for 10 years of experience or some X years of experience before I have enough
Right.
exposure to start it? Or should I just with
Right.
zero experience just go ahead and start it? So generally, what's your take on that?
Right. Wow, this question can take hours to answer. This is an extremely deep question, but extremely important too, right? I think on the top level, if you are actually thinking to start a startup, right? If you're actually at least have thought of it, right? That says something itself, right? That basically, you look at yourself, then you say, hey, do I have the am I do I have the personality for it, right? I do believe in kind of, startup personality, right? Like, do I have the personality of, being a founder, right? Do I am I willing to take the risk, right? Am I willing to kind of, uh, be committed to, the next, 5 to 10 years of, take no vacation and working extra long hours, in exchange for the hope that one day, my company can worth more than $1 billion, right? More than $10 billion. Do you have the guts to do it, right? And are you well suited for this, right? Like, does your family support you? How's your financial look, right? Do you have kids, right? Like, are you a international student who needs a visa sponsorship, and without it, you will be deported, right? Those are extremely,
So that was the biggest reason why I moved back to India. And today, till today, everybody I talk to asks me that, hey, you were in US, you were working with big companies there, you could have started your startup there. And I was like, no, it's just like with the visa laws and a lot of these international, countries, it's always good to just go back home, go to the country, or go to the ecosystem that right, and kind of build something there where I have the flexibility to take time off and just start thinking about what I want to do, how I want to do, without worrying about, oh, I might get deported from this country tomorrow because now I don't have a job, now I'm not on a valid visa. So there are a lot of those questions, and I think the risk part that you highlighted, and there's not just the financial risk, but there is a time risk as well, right? I
right,
think a lot of people kind of undervalue that. They think I can spend the next 2 years doing a startup and I can do it from my own house, I don't need to hire anybody, technology I can build myself. But imagine this, that if you're not doing the startup for 2 years, you might be working at some other company and gaining valuable experience, right? Building up your network as well. So doing this versus doing something else, there is always a time risk involved as well, right? So people need to kind of understand the value of time there, which I think, especially in Indian context, it gets overlooked very easily. It's always like, can I spend 2 years without a paycheck versus getting a paycheck? But there is an extra component. There's 2 years of time here and 2 years of networking and resources and connections and experience that you're missing out, probably missing out.
right.
You'll get different
Yeah.
kind of things here, but kind of think on both the money side, think on both the time sides as well, right?
Right. Yeah. There's definitely is a opportunity cost, and I think understanding the risk that you're taking, understanding your practical position when it comes to if there's any limitations that's stopping you, are the right answers to ask of should I start a company myself? The wrong questions to ask to whether or not I should start a company is do I have a good idea or not? Or, because it probably doesn't matter and only you think your idea is the best idea in the world. And you might ended up pivoting and, it's probably not. And another wrong reason to start a company is that I think I will be rich, because more than likely you will not. You just hope you can. You're fighting for the chance to do it. And there are many other wrong reasons to start a startup. But I forgot. I think it's probably Sam Altman once said, basically you should only start a startup when you think that if you don't do it, it's a crime to the world. You have to be like, this world needs my startup. You kind of have to be that level to kind of, confident enough to do it. And, especially make sure your family is supporting you through it, because, you will be facing a lot of pressure financially and emotionally. Make sure they understand what you're doing, and they won't you know because they will be looking at other kids around the block and making big bucks at big companies, and you don't want to you want them to be understanding the path you're taking. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think sort of a kind of an add-on question there was that from Vikram wanted to know about, same kind of a context, but for freelancing, right? Like if I want to become a more of a freelancer, when should I start? I'm guessing that's the question. When should I start? How should I make a decision if I want to become a more of a freelancer?
Yeah, interesting. I think freelancing is more of unless you're planning to do it like make freelancing your career for a very long period of time, right? I think of it as a transition period, kind of because there are obvious benefits to it, right? Like maybe you're probably not going to be making as much money as a full-time employee, but in exchange you get more flexibility and more kind of time to learn the business, right? You kind of choose the right level of commitment, and through freelancing, and when you're doing it, then you eventually will, I think, choose either you know start your own thing, or join a big company as full-time. I see it as a transitioning period. I'm not sure if that answers your question, or you're choosing. I mean, there are people, there are people who just write on like open source repositories for years as freelancing, and eventually it get picked up and gains popularity, and people are donating money to it. And if you can be at that level, great. You're helping the world to to producing a better library. But just really understanding what you want and who you are, and long term, especially look at the long term. um, what is the goal there, and how do you use this freelancing kind of period to reach what you want? Yeah, that's
So
how I see it. Yeah.
I think one thing I'll add to that as well is like you can augment your sort of financials through freelancing as well. But like Sim said, it's more of a transition thing, right? Like you want to see how this kind of matures out into maybe a full time opportunity or a full time career that has flexibility and whatnot. Uh, One thing I've learned, or rather, one sort of candidate I was interviewing, he's a blockchain developer, and he was like, "Hey man, I want to work with you, and I'll work for free. I am a blockchain guy. I'll work for free." And this guy had 6 years of experience. So I was like, "Why do you want to work for free?" He's like, "I'm new to blockchain. Okay, I know web technologies. So what I'm doing is I'm devoting 10 hours of my life every week to different startups and working in blockchain for free because now I want to learn blockchain." Okay. So now if I'm saying, Sim, I want to work with you and introduce blockchain into your company, you're a startup, you want good people to work for you for less pay or no pay, right? It's a good position to have. And on the other side, this guy is getting exposure working with a startup, building a real product for them as well, right? So that's a hack that a lot of developers can use, where you might have a full-time job. You tell the startup that I'll add some features to your product on a technology that I'm new to, and I'll do it for free, right? And they'll be happy to take you in because you're doing it for free. You'll get real exposure. You'll build networking, real world networking connections with the team. And hopefully, once you start learning this new technology, you might actually get offered a job, a full time job as well, right? So, and practically from that interview, I learned more than what I was hoping to interview this guy for. But it's just those kind of weird things that happen when you start talking to a lot of these different set of people, etc. as well, right? So yeah. Cool. So we have another question. So this comes from Shubham, who is in our game dev crew, and he's asking like, you started your career as a game developer, now you've transitioned into a web kind of a profile. So why specifically, the transition, and doesn't it feel like whenever you're making this transition, you're hitting a reset and going back to zero and starting all over again, right? So why specifically transition, and can you just talk about your journey there?
Yeah, definitely. I think I personally made the choice because I think there's a lot more than Unity itself, right? I feel like, for whatever reason, during my days of, game developer, I was somewhat limited to only the, Unity aspect of it, which is like a, rendering engine is a great great start point to to get my first job and put a real product out there. But I'm interested in other things too, right? Like I still want to kind of stay within the gaming kind of industry, right? Where that's all my connections are. That's still where my passion is even today, right? But I personally wanted to experience, like to explore some of the other more generalized web technology. And that's why I kind of made the transition. And the transition doesn't happen overnight though, right? Like it's not like I'm dropping whatever I have learned and worked on in the past and just, switching to this new thing. It kind of trickles in, when you're working on Unity, you would look into, how your, game client is, communicating through the server, right? Is it a web socket, right? Is it a REST API, right? Then you start to look into, hey, can I add a few things to the, web socket or, REST API? So I don't have to bother the backend developers to make that interface for me, right? Slowly and slowly, you're adding more things to the backend. Then you're like, hey, maybe I can do a management tool for this, for managing the user's currency, for managing the user's transaction history, right? I want to look at. You start to make a lot of tools yourself. Then eventually you're like, hey, I can make backend, I can make front end. This is web technology, right? Like even web technology can be used in Unity or replace Unity, or it's kind of a whole mix. You kind of start from one point, which is Unity, then you kind of explore a lot of other technologies, and it takes some time. But I think for me, my current company is helping live streamers on Twitch. With streaming live games to generate revenue. Then I am building the website, building the backend, and a lot of business kind of related BD and fundraising. So it's even goes beyond technology. Right now, it's a lot of communication. How do you have a grand vision of your company? So it expands from the technology side, from Unity to general technology, then even beyond technology. So that's kind of how I transitioned myself. Everyone has their own different paths. Um, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's good because even same happened with me as well, right? Like I started off with not being a game developer. My career started with doing Perl and Python at a finance company, a huge finance company, and that too as well, DE Shaw. And and this is before Python even had classes, right? Like there was no thing called classes inside Python. This is back in 2009. So, and then transitioned into game development, and then transitioned into AI, and now I'm building my own company in education, right? Everybody's sort of career kind of shapes a very different way. So some people are, not openly willing to take that risk, so they stay in one sort of a career. Others, their career, their professions shape in where they want to take more risks and are driven by taking risk because they want to push themselves. So it purely depends on who you are as an individual, and then kind of shaping up and making those choices for yourself as to how you want your career to shape up as well.
Definitely,
Cool.
definitely.
So I think the next question kind of comes from Shivansh regarding decentralized organizations and gig
Right.
economy. Shivansh, I'm not sure if I understand decentralized organizations in what context. They can be decentralized on many levels, be it decision making, be it geographically distributed, be it small scrum teams spread across different countries across working on different products. So if you can elaborate what you mean by decentralized organizations and which context you're talking about. But
Right.
I think we can definitely talk a little bit about the gig economy, and that's kind of extension of the freelance question that we were talking about
Right.
earlier.
Right.
So,
Right.
so how are you seeing this sort of gig economy play out?
Yeah, I think I definitely see there is a trend going on in the Silicon Valley, basically like not exactly the same thing, but like kind of remote working, decentralized. Let's not have an office, and we have all the tools needed to write software. Each of us, working from our home, and rather than spending 3 hours commuting to the office, and paying bills and electricity and insurance for the office. I definitely see a trend there. Um, you know, I think uh, the whole industry, I think we're at the beginning of kind of, figuring out how remote work and, a decentralized company is like. I think we're at the beginning of it. I don't think there are many companies that have completely figured this out yet. It'll be interesting to see what it's going to be like in the next, maybe 5 years. Right now, Zoom is a public company, right? I've heard the CEO of Zoom only took 2 or 3 in-person business trips out of his almost 10 years working at Zoom, because whenever someone requests a in-person meeting, he'll just say, "Hey, let's do Zoom," and to promote his own product. But I think we are at a position where we're writing software, we have video chat, right? Like all the tools are there, and people want to have a more flexible working hours. And I think especially in technology companies, it's what matters is, are you a team player, are you productive? What does not matter is you have to come to the office at 9 a.m. in the morning every day, right? Like, who cares? um, yeah, I think we're getting there, but we're not there just yet. We'll see how it goes. When it comes to the freelancing kind of gig economy, um, yeah, I don't know. I can't say I'm the expert on that. We certainly have used contractors on a project basis, and there are freelancers come and goes. I think one important thing to understand from the other side of the table is that, imagine you are running a company and you have freelancers to work. um, what are the things you will like, are you willing to have uh, the most core business to be outsourced, and how, apparently there is a risk to that, and you would be worried about, hey, how will my investor look at this, right? Like, how will my competitor look at this? And I think still the full-time kind of work, and apparently there's kind of intellectual property issues related to it. There's a lot of regulation related to it. Uber is still trying to figure out, are all of my drivers contractors, or are they employees? And there's a lot of lawsuits going on about it. Like, I think we're still at like, at a position where um, the core business of every company is handled by, of course, full-time employees, and there are some project-based freelancing work that the companies do use on a as need basis. I think that's where we are. That's how I kind of see it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, yeah, I'm in a very similar bucket as well myself. I definitely feel gig economy still has time to shape up how we see it in the next decade or so. But one thing I'm very pro on is the remote work culture. So even at Jungle Games, and after that as well, last
Mm.
5 6 years I spent working with completely distributed teams. I was the only one in entire India when I was at Changdi who was part of that team. Few in Hong Kong, then Europe, then US, Canada, across the entire continent, split small 15 people teams split across the entire set of continents, etc. Right? So that is something I'm very pro on, and I feel like even in India, that's how the way it should be. Where if I have a really kick-ass guy sitting in Ahmedabad, right, I shouldn't ask him to relocate to Delhi or Bangalore just because the office is there, right? He wants to stick with the family or have personal commitments, but really awesome guy, want to work with me. We want him part of the team. There's literally nothing stopping us from bringing the person onto the team as well, right?
Right,
So
right.
I'm very pro on remote work culture. Kind of neutral on gig economy structure. I still feel people need to be full time in order to do their best job. Otherwise, their focus kind of keeps shifting here and there, etc. And they don't have surety and assurances that hey, whether I'm going to continue doing this for the next month or so. So from that perspective, I still feel till we figure out the financials around gig economy, generally remote work culture and that that notion is definitely going to stick, and it's just going upwards as a trend, no matter how we look at it, right?
Right.
So I think we're just about time. So I'll ask one last question, and I know a lot of students usually end up having this question as well. That in today's day and age, should I look at going to US or Europe for higher studies? I know you did it, I did it. A lot of students ask me, should I go to Stanford, Harvard, all these CMUs and prestigious Purdue universities, because these are a fucking expensive. It's a big time commitment, even for like a master's program, and after that, with the current sort of Trump fiasco in the visa situation, you don't know whether you'll be able to get a job or not as well, right? So generally, what's your take? Should people think about applying for masters, and especially to international universities and whatnot?
Right. Here, yeah, I think that if you can go to Stanford, you should still do it. Even to, even not to finish it and just, dropping off after a few years, that's something to say on your resume, right? But, joking aside, I think my overall opinion of higher education, I actually have some controversy, in my opinion. I actually think that what you learn, like the knowledge that you learn in the higher education in the universities, only represent 1/3 of the value, right? The knowledge is actually only the 1/3. The other 1/3 is the network of it, right? The people around you, and they will turn into someone interesting in the industry, right? Knowing, just the friends, sitting right next to you, right? The network value. Then the other 1/3 is actually the brand name, the endorsement, kind of when you put the university on your resume, you get more interviews. So with that said, basically what I mean is that even if you get into a university and learned absolutely nothing, you are getting 2/3 of the value of the university. But that's just how I think, right? On the flip side, I do think that going to universities are kind of you are basically playing safe, right? Like it's not a wrong strategy, right? It's a very well strategy, but it is basically playing safe in a sense that you need the endorsement, you need the network, right? You need all of those things to knock on doors, right? But if you are a true, visionary, you really have the guts, you know exactly what you want in life, and you have a clear vision of, what you want to achieve. You don't need a university to do that, right? You can learn coding online. You can build products with, you can self teach yourself to write code. You don't need any of that. You can start your own company, right? Like you don't have to always go find a job, right? All the great companies are started by someone, right? Like you can be that someone, right? If you have the guts to do it. But going to university, I think I myself is benefited from it. Going to a good university, Carnegie Mellon, uh, when you know when you drive around in Silicon Valley, there's a lot of Carnegie Mellon alumni. Um, so I definitely benefited from it. Doesn't mean that everyone needs it, and especially Silicon Valley. If you went to Stanford and you dropped out, it's actually better than graduating in some sense, which is really weird. Um, yeah, but that's kind of my take on higher education.
No, yeah, I absolutely agree. I think the way you kind of structured it, the one third, one third, one third, was like actually very fascinating, because I sort of thought it from a very similar perspective, but never just put it in those percentage terms, right? But I think for me, personally, for me, when people ask me, I only value the middle one third, which is the network and the alumni groups, right? Learning can be done in different ways, much cheaper ways, almost free ways as well. The last part where you're saying that it adds value on your resume. If you know you're not going to get a job at a very fancy company, you don't even need those resumes. If you know you're going to do something by yourself, you are a self starter, you're more like Steve Jobs. I have the vision, I have the thing in mind, and no matter what, I'm not going to stop before I build this shit, right?
Right.
That degree is not going to add any value on your resume as well. So, but irrespective of what you do, where you go, whatever it might be, it's the middle one third that's mentioned, right? The network, the alumni, the people that you sit with, that you interact with. That is something that will definitely add more value. But I think there are cheaper ways of making that network as well. Going to Stanford and dropping out and not paying the tuition for the full 4 years, 3 years, 2 years, whatever program you're doing is definitely one way. And I think one other approach that, again, this is a hack I found from one of the other guys I was interviewing, was like, instead of applying to Stanford and Harvard, where the chances of admission is so low, that you will end up wasting so much money just in the application process itself, right? The applications also are very expensive. What you can do is apply to smaller colleges, state colleges, city colleges, where you know that you will get an admission and you'll probably get a scholarship. Go there, enter the country, and then drop out.
Exactly.
Right? If the goal is to drop out and just get into the country to do something, of course I'm not publicly endorsing it, but just saying that people have figured out alternative ways. So it's just about being smart and recognizing where opportunities are, and taking those opportunities up, and not worrying too much about the money aspect, but worrying about how are you going to spend that time, because once that time is gone, it's never coming back. You can spend money and you can get it back, but the time is never going to get it back, right?
And another great hack is actually to think about the city that you're going to study in. In Silicon Valley, Stanford and Berkeley, everyone,
Yeah.
has heard about and hiring. But there is also San Jose State University, which is shockingly a lot of computer scientists are graduated there. It's not a great university, but it's sitting in the center of Silicon Valley, and their student kind of get a advantage at the position where the university is located at. So think about your career path and where you want to live and work with, and maybe find a good university locally, right? Maybe not as competitive, not as expensive. You will get some advantage just being local. Yeah.
Yep. Perfect. Perfect. Cool. So awesome, Sim. Great chat overall. I think folks in the chat definitely learned a thing or two, and would have generally just enjoyed the conversation as well. Yeah, and guys, Sim just put in his email ID in the chat. Feel free to just drop him an email if you have any sort of follow-up questions, etc. You guys can CC me as well if there's something I can add value there. By now, generally, I think, thanks, for staying up so late. I know it's past 12 o'clock for you. So really appreciate you joining the session today, and hopefully you had a fun time as well.
Definitely,
And,
definitely.
and probably, look at doing this more often going forward as well, but probably next time with a broader audience, and generally open it up to the world. So cool. Thanks again. Any
Definitely.
closing
All
comments?
right. Yeah, no, this has been great. If anyone wants to, drop me a line, any questions, feel free to send me an email. I wish everyone a very successful 2020.
All right, cool, awesome. Thanks, Tim. Take care, and guys, everything up will be available on YouTube, so you guys will get a recording as well later. But cool. So thanks for joining in. Take care, guys. Have a fun weekend.
All right.
All right.
Bye.